Once again, thank you guys for joining me. It's really great to have you both here. When I was planning on my video about Mondo and the art of soundtracks, I was best case scenarios. I could sit down with you guys and sort of fill in the gaps that, I just might not have time for the video, just might be better on a conversation. I started doing research for that video. I was trying to paint a picture for myself about like how were soundtracks on vinyl like before I would say 2010, before things really started. So Spencer, for you, could you describe like the state of vinyl just before 2010, just before you started Death Waltz?
I mean, vinyl was actually in a fairly good place 2010. Record Store Day had been going for a fair few years, which had really raised awareness. And year on year, as it still is, sales were rising. As for soundtracks, there weren't really any. I mean, I have to say huge props to like Finest Keepers and Trunk Records, because throughout that fallow period, when people were not releasing soundtracks on vinyl, they continued to release amazing soundtracks and dig in the crates. But most of the majors and even the specialist labels like Lakeshore and Milan, they weren't releasing soundtracks on vinyl. It was, it was so niche.
Yeah.
It was niche in the 80s. And then, in the 90s, it just, vinyl dropped off. And then obviously soundtracks were like one of the first genres to go. So there weren't really any labels consistently putting out soundtracks around that time.
Well, I guess with that in mind, I'll ask you sort of like what sort of inspired you to start at Death Waltz? Because looking back when you started Death Waltz, like, that was quite a step. That was quite an accomplishment, I would say.
It's really funny because when I came up with the idea for the label, and then Mondo beat me to market with the first record because they had the same idea. So it was obviously bubbling away, and my background's always been like music and primarily record shops. And I was running Rough Trade East at the time, and we just found the spot that was going to become Rough Trade New York. And I was getting ready to move to New York to open Rough Trade, and it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And I just wanted to do something as a hobby that I thought would be fun. And, my big loves are like obviously music and records, and then movies. I'm like a horror movie kid, like tattoos and, stupid little horror fan. And I just thought it'd be really cool to put something out that hadn't been out before. And I just figured that, if I was interested in that, there must be 500 people out there that would be. And I don't want to speak for Mo. I mean, obviously we're almost linked at the hip these days. But I imagine that was the same feeling at Mondo, because they were creating, these cool posters. And I certainly knew Mondo through the posters. It just felt like it would be cool and people would be into it, and then, speaking of Death Waltz, I was incredibly lucky. I contacted Fabio and Daniela at Beat about Zombie Flesh Eaters, and they were like, yeah, cool. And I was like, okay, first release, it's pretty cool. And then spoke to Silver Screen, who owned the rights to Escape from New York, and they were like, yeah, cool, you want to put it on vinyl? Go for it. Because at the time, it must have seemed, and me and Mo have talked about this a lot, you would go and ask someone if you could license their title for vinyl, and they'd laugh at you basically, because they would just be like, yeah, go ahead, you crazy kids. You're not going to make any money doing that.
Yeah.
And it took off, and I guess it just struck a chord with people in the same way that, at exactly the same time, Mo had started to release records.
Mo, then going to you, like, how did you connect with Mondo? Like, how did you arrive at Mondo?
I have a really much sillier version. I was out of film school. I was a tour manager for musicians. So I worked in the music industry for a little while. I was traveling around the United States and Europe and Canada with bands and working in and around the scene. You know, I had a love of music, and growing up I had a love of soundtracks, and, you know, but like never connected those dots. I moved to Austin shortly after I had stopped touring, because it was just cheaper to live in Austin than it was in New York. And I was looking to, like, you know, start something new on my own. And I was looking for a part-time job. I applied at this place that I had been a fan of because I heard of their posters, this place called Mondo. And I applied, and they were like, yeah, we're not really hiring. We'll put you on, you know, we'll send your resume in, but like, don't expect to hear back. And then within 2 weeks, I heard back, and I was like, oh, cool. Okay, great. Perfect. And I went in, and they didn't tell me this in my email, but I had apparently come up in conversations about being their general manager. What had happened is, at that time, right when I applied, there was this weird, like, they had decided that, like, the web store had been taking off, the posters had been really taking off, and like they needed somebody to be in charge of the web store. And like part-time, when I was in New York, I was working at a web store. I was their shipping manager between tours. And so that experience came in handy, and they hired me on as basically a guy to like overhaul their shipping store. And then within like 3 months of me being there, it had come to my attention that we were going to be doing our first vinyl release. And I was like, this is so cool. This is amazing. You know, I had been collecting records because of Record Store Day and all these different things, you know, and just having records from being on tour all the time. Like whenever a friend's band put out a record, I would buy it and I would bring it home. And, you know, even if I didn't have a turntable at the time because I was moving around so much, I just had it because I was like, this is valuable. This is something that's like special to me. Like I have this 500 limited to 1,000 copies of the Format's Dog Problems or something like that. You know, like I just had this thing that like represented my favorite record. And I'm so glad that I had it. And then very quickly I understood that Mondo as a company was making these records, but they didn't really even truly understand what they were doing at the time. Like our CEO at the time, like liked the idea of doing a new collectible thing, but like he was very quickly like out of his depth. And he was like, Mo, you worked in music. Why don't you run this little record department? And I was like, sure. I mean, it was more interesting and more focused than the general manager thing. And so I was like, yeah, that's great. I'll keep an eye on this. But this is like when we were releasing a record a year for the first 2 years. And then it became like, oh no, these records, they seem to be doing all right. We should do one every month. And that was the first mandate, was in 2013, like one a month. And I was like, okay. And then I really had to hit the ground running because, truth be told, like while I worked in the music industry, I didn't ever make records before. So like I had to learn at the same time as we were doing it. So I had to like deal with licensing, and I had to deal with production and fulfillment and everything. And it was like the biggest crash course ever. And while I had the, you know, the know-how and the aesthetic taste of like what we should be doing next and all these things, it was so much more of like a literal, like it was night school at the same time, where I was like learning how this whole thing worked while the entire industry was waking up from this dormant stasis of being like, oh, people like vinyl. And like Spencer said, like I would go to these meetings and, you know, with Universal Music and be like, hey, can we do we do Jurassic Park? And they'd be like, on vinyl? Really? Weird. Okay. And that's literally like for the first couple of years, it was like that, like literally trying to like be like, no. Here's the deal. Like we have a limited edition collectibles website and we do these things. And I promise like it'll be worth your time and your money, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's easier. Now we can walk in and people know who we are and it's not that far fetched. But like for those first couple of years, it really was just sort of like, here's the sales pitch. We work at this website called Mondo Shop. You know, we want to do this. We want to release this record on vinyl. And like, it'd be really cool if we could do our own original artwork as well. Like, you know, and then chasing down the rights, because soundtracks, unlike a lot of other consumer products, the licenses is just like, they're all over the place. Like people, sometimes composers own them, sometimes studios own them, sometimes now defunct record labels own them that have been consumed by majors. Sometimes the reason they've never been released is because they have been in litigation for decades and you just never can figure those out.
I'll start with like the creative aspect. You mentioned original artwork. How do you arrive to sort of, how do you connect the dots with like creating original artwork for it?
I've always bought like records, so I've always collected. Yeah, and when I was younger, the first soundtrack I ever bought was Star Wars, The Muppet Show, and Laurel and Hardy 7-inch. And then I used to pick up like the John Carpenter records, like back in the 80s. And it never really upset me at the time because I was just like, oh, cool, got a new record, and I listened to this record, and there it is. But as I got older, it just kind of, I don't want to say it felt lazy, but it just, it really was obvious that a lot of these albums, they had just cut down the poster, the main segment of the poster to stick on this 12 by 12. And then when I started to buy Japanese vinyl, look at Japanese vinyl, like if you see the cover to the Japanese Day of the Dead or Phantasm, or even Dawn of the Dead, they are wildly different than the American and European editions. They use their own artwork. They're pretty crazy. And I always thought that was really cool. And, when it came to the label, I mean, the original idea was that reissue these really cool soundtracks. And in some cases, it's not a reissue because it never ever been out before. Like Zombie Flesh Eaters, for instance, it's never been released on vinyl. But then how do I make it even cooler? And to me, having like a really nice, bespoke, unique piece of artwork that speaks to that particular record, is what I wanted to do. And it took me so long to think of the name of the label and then come up with the idea and contact all these people. And then I'll pass it over to Mo, because then Mondo released Maniac Fantastic Fest, which I have a copy of, signed by Bill Lustig, and it's amazing. But I was crushed, man, because I was just like, oh, this is like a year. I didn't know what to do. So yeah, it was just about creating something that was cool. It's something that I wanted. And you hope other people will as well.
Yeah, I mean, two of the things that I get to be associated with that I don't get to take any credit for are the fact that I worked at Mondo when the record label started, and the idea for the original art was before my time, and that's the beauty of it. Like, Mondo's whole aesthetic, and as you've talked about in your video, is creating original art, returning the art to the poster, and then therefore returning art to the soundtrack packaging. It was a idea that came fully baked out of the oven, and I get to take, pick up the legacy of the company and continue it. The other aspect of it that I feel completely blessed that we took on very early, like I feel was a godsend, was that like we decided that no genre was off the table. And so it went from Maniac, which is a very niche, inapproachable movie by a mainstream standard, right, to Beyond, which is sort of, in the same family, if not, an international cousin of sorts, to Deadly Spawn, and then Poltergeist. And so all in the horror genre, but then very quickly we're like, Drive, Looper, The Raid, and then it was like also like Paranorman, Coraline, Studio Ghibli, and then it was like Jurassic Park. And so then immediately you have like tentpole 4-quadrant films, animated children's films, horror, and action, and so those became the staples very early on, and because of that, like none of those seemed that uncharacteristic, because we had done stuff like that on the posters too. Like we had done Looney Tunes cartoons, and we'd done like animated shorts and children's things, so it wasn't uncharacteristic of us. And obviously doing things like Jurassic Park and Looper, those we were doing posters for things like that, horror as well. And so like we got to do those and play in those genres that like our fans had come to accept that we can do original artwork for. And, it was an easy transition to make to some degree. It got a little more difficult once we started trying to branch out of those genres into something even more specific, like, 90s teen comedies or comedies in general, right? Like once you get into like the categories, things like even we struggle with that with posters to this day. It's hard to create artwork for things that like typically you don't see a lot of fine artwork done for on the industry level as well.
Is there a difference between the process you go for posters or vinyl? Like what are some of the unique creative aspects that vinyl presents when you're designing the package?
I guess I can speak to it as someone who worked in posters for a little bit, but ultimately like I said, my path took me into soundtracks. There's a bit of a narrative to vinyl. You got a package, you got a front cover, a back cover, an interior gatefold, you have interior pockets. It's an interactive experience. With posters, you have a single striking image that's sold based on its JPEG that's on our website, right? You take a picture of it, or you do a digital mock-up, you show it, and you go like, would you like to have a larger format version of this on your wall? As opposed to a soundtrack, which you go like, okay, here's an image that represents the front cover of this album. It's the same sort of experience. If you're walking through a record store and you're flipping through a record rack and you see a single image, do you judge a book by its cover? Do you judge a record by its cover? I know I do, but also knowing that there's so much other real estate in here, like what are the possibilities? What else could be in here? If this is what the front cover is, what's going to be on inside? What's going to be on the back cover? What's going to be inside the pockets? What's going to be in the liner notes? What's going to be all these things? Like it is a promise, akin to buying a novel or a video game. It's so much more, it's media at the same time, right? The colored vinyl, you can tell so many different stories and other elements, little Easter eggs, little comments on the format, all buried in one single package that, while some people may frame it and hang it and can be represented by its front cover, is so much more than just that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that obviously as a fan of the format and soundtracks, I enjoy that sort of just soundtrack specifically, kind of like, because it's a narrative medium, it's music made for film, that sort of translates so well to like the vinyl design. And it's kind of like such a fun playground, I would say, as a creative person. So once you guys have decided on a release, can you guide me through sort of what is the creative process that goes on at Mondo and Death Waltz to final product now? Like what are the conversations like? How do you guys tackle it? Is it as a team?
I think we have a really unique way of working that, there are projects that I would just tackle on my own. There's projects that Mo would just tackle on his own. And then there's projects that we kind of bounce off one another. And we finally got a third member of the team this past year, Shannon. Big shout out to Shannon because he's helped us incredibly. And now we have someone else that we can bounce off. So I think it's like I see it as, it's definitely like a team effort, but there's all these different branches. And honestly, we are balancing so many projects at any given time. There's, sometimes there's not even time to say, oh, I just signed this, like new movie, or, Mel ring me 10 p.m. my time. He'll be like, oh, Disney just called, they just offered us this. So there's just, we are incredibly busy. Like we were joking about this yesterday because we launched a new record, and there's like the three of us. I mean, obviously we have a bunch of people behind the scenes helping as well, but I'm trying to release the record on Bandcamp. I'm trying to like make sure the YouTube videos are live, and a normal record label like a subsidiary of Warner's would have 10 to 15 people in the room just working on that. So there isn't like a particular set way of working for each release. And honestly, some releases, Twin Peaks for instance, took 3.5 years to get to the point where we could release it. And other projects, Possessor that we just released on Friday, came together in less than 4 weeks. So it's just we work in a really weird industry, and we say this all the time. It's pretty crazy that this is our jobs, but we're constantly looking for new artists. We're constantly kind of sharing ideas for new effects. What can we do? Colors, like combining different effects. So there's not a easy answer to that one. Like it's a big mess that's really.
But I imagine that's part of the fun, though. There's no one thing that is the same. So I feel like that keeps it super interesting and fun for you guys. So I'm glad that's kind of the case too. You mentioned you were working yesterday on a record. That was the Michael Giacchino original release that just came out. Yeah. And I just kind of want to brought that up. I mean, apart from being a personally huge fan of his, from your point of view, that's the first original sort of non-film soundtrack from an Oscar-winning composer, one of the most talented one, and you guys are the label that are releasing that. How big of an accomplishment does that feel for you guys? Because I think, someone looking out, like, wow, that's a big deal,
One of the first titles that I really wanted to do when the label became, mine to manage was Lost. I had dreamed of doing it. I carved out a catalog number for it with like it was a secret vision board where I was like, I'm gonna make Lost happen at Mondo 108 because that's the number I want to do it at, and it came together last year. It was a live version, the live concert, but that came because of like 5 years of working towards it in building a trustful relationship with Michael and his sister Maria, whose production company, Little Jacket, managed his affairs. And so we did Inside Out, we did Jurassic World, we did Jurassic World 2, we did Speed Racer, and all the way we were doing that, like we kept in touch. We did Ratatouille. We had crossed paths with Michael, and he was always very sweet about it. He seemed like very like enthusiastic and like excited that like we were celebrating his work. But we also couldn't tell if he like really truly understood what it was that we were doing, in the sense that like he might have thought it was cool, but like maybe, like, I don't know, if we were to say like, hey, we want to do this, he would be like, sure, go ahead, or if he was like, yeah. But then we very definitively found out that he was doing this on the sidelines because he just emailed us out of the blue in July, and he was like, I've been bored during quarantine. I recorded a record. Do you want to listen to it? And then he sent it over. And then I was like, oh man, like, what's this going to sound like? And then he basically made a record for Spencer explicitly. Like, it was like, basically he made Spencer's dream record, and it was absolutely like just magic from there out.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we released, we announced the record yesterday and it went on sale, and we dropped the first single digitally, which was a new experience for us because, although we do release things on streaming platforms, we have never dropped a single in advance of an album where you can't hear the album. And I mean, for me, the record is phenomenal. And if ever a year needed a record like this, it's 2020, because it's really beautiful. It's a great story. It's really uplifting. It's really intricate. It's fantastic. I mean, basically, Michael has made his version of a Martin Denny Exotica easy listening lounge record. And then in the conversations we've been, because we have weekly catch-ups, he's a huge fan of, that era of music. Which to me was like really exciting because I love all that stuff as well, like the Jungle Exotica albums and stuff. And then, also we're really blessed because the record is phenomenal. I mean, that's the thing that we should, mention. I mean, yes, it is incredibly humbling for us that he came to us, to our label, to Mondo, to put the record out. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, it's quite stressful yesterday, I'm not going to lie, when we were dropping the record, because there's a lot of moving parts. It's the first time we've really commissioned a video, by someone, an actual animated video. I mean, we have a great in-house team who, they made our promos for Autopsy of Jane Doe and Evil Dead and, all this, like all that really cool stuff. So it was, it's still great for us, really. I mean, we're almost, 10 years in and we're still learning, things as we go along. And, we do get to have a good time, even though it's your nerves are a little frayed for a couple of hours during the day.
You mentioned that video too. Something I really enjoy, obviously, being a video person myself. What role do you guys see video having on Mondo? And, if you guys want to just keep it Mondo music, but just moving forward, like how, is that the kind of thing you guys are looking forward to? Like, I love the promo for Jane Doe. That was great.
I think it changes literally almost daily. There's a version of Mondo in a obviously non-pandemic time that is producing that sort of level of content at a clip, on a monthly basis, and that just being sort of its own department. That was the vision. But things have changed, like priorities shifted, and because of, just sort of the necessities of how this whole thing worked out, priorities just sort of changed. I mean, I think that there's still a vision of, because Spencer and I, like, wanted to start a podcast at the beginning of this year. And the way that would have worked was, we sort of introduced the idea to the group, and then we were going to start doing it, but then allowing other people to hop on and take over for it. And then this year happened, and immediately we were like, oh, wait, no, we should start doing video happy hours. And then so we started doing that. And then so there's a lot of like unfortunate realities that sort of set in based on the needs of the year. And I think that, we love making commercials for our product. I think there's something about the generations that both of us grew up in and our love of like vintage commercials, that are like cheeky, strange, funny, knowing, with high production value, but also like a sensibility that understands that you are promoting an incredibly niche object, but also having budget limitations is sort of like short filmmaking, and we have a team of creatives at Mondo who love doing that. But bandwidth is a legitimate issue. And also like, it's hard to justify making commercials for products that are going to sell out in 30 seconds. Like that's something that we also have to get over, is the idea that like, we would have come up with a video for Tron Legacy, right? And then our Tron Legacy record sold out in 7 minutes. And our video department would have been like, why the hell did we spend 3 weeks producing the video for something that you don't actually need to advertise?
You're right about that, because talking about Autopsy of Jane Doe, I mean, we only made 666 copies of that record. And the record cost so much money to make because we went to town on the packaging. Then we do that video on top. But to me, that's part of the fun,
Yeah. Personally, that's one of the best packaging designs I've ever seen on a vinyl. That it's amazing. And I feel like the video too, just everything about that release is like the best or standard or trend-setting kind of level. Can you just give us some insight of like, what was that creative process for that release?
I saw the movie and fell in love with it. Like, I really think that is like a modern day classic, right? Like a horror movie. And then we had done a poster for it at Fantastic Fest. And I met the director and said, I'd love to do this. And he was like, yeah, cool. Okay. It was as simple as that. And then we sorted the licensing. I asked Jay if he would take care of packaging for us, Jay Shaw. And I had this kind of rough idea of, what I wanted to do with it. And I sketched that on a napkin, and I'm a terrible artist. Gave it to Jay, and then, it took us a year probably. And then, the production, like, side of that, those guys were amazing. I asked them for so many reference photos from the set, and they got me everything that we needed. And Jay just knocked it out of the park. And, Jay's got an incredible mind, for his design and his packaging. And he was one of the first artists that, I really wanted on Death Waltz, even though I did know he was kind of like a Mondo artist, And again, we're just really lucky because the video that I just jokingly said in a meeting, we should make a video in a mortuary. And then someone at one of the team at Mondo went, I can get us in a mortuary, man. And then he was like, what? He was like, yeah, we go after hours. And then the whole thing is like real guerrilla style filmmaking. But that video looks like it cost a lot of money, but it's just a lot of talent, like Thomas and those guys just knocked it out of the park. I would, like, as Mo says, if we could do that for every release, that would be the ultimate dream. But the bandwidth to create stuff like that is, it takes a lot, and we are relatively a small team, but we definitely have one more video this year for a title, which will come out in November, which I'm excited about. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, next year will be somewhat back to normal, and we can start to do more of that.
Yeah,
because that is really exciting. I do love to see those videos like that come together, And I guess, we did Mondopalooza as part of San Diego Comic-Con, and we just started to get submissions in for Mondopalooza Halloween, which we're going to do on Halloween night. So that's really exciting as well for like both of us, because you get to sort of, you get to work with artists that are putting records out. But for this one, we've said, send us in a cover version of like one of your favorite songs. We've got some amazing stuff, and the lineup's shaping up to be really great. So that's like a fun way of having the videos out there, and we don't have to do too much work on that because the guys make that themselves.
The Mondopalooza one this summer, like it was such a fun time. It was one of the few times, I guess, in the beginning of pandemic, I could just disconnect it, didn't think about the news cycle or anything. I was just having fun. Props to you guys. That was just a good product, but also just like a good thing. So I really enjoy that.
Really fun. And it was also really fun for us because we're in the chat on YouTube with everyone. Even though our good friend Greg at Electrocal Creative edited the video, the whole thing together for us. And Paul Leonard Morgan, Tales from the Loop, he sent in like 3 different camera angles, and Greg also edited all of that together. And then we put the whole thing together. And then on that evening, I stayed up till like 3 a.m. I was like buzzing because people were so happy. And it really, to me, because you can't go to, we can't be at conventions. We can't be at Texas Frightmare. We're not at San Diego Comic-Con. This really felt like bringing the community together. And for an absolute fact, people were going, I didn't know this artist before. Oh, this is really great. So to me, that was like very significant part of the year for me, because it was not a good year, man. And I was not in a good spot. And then that really helped because you just suddenly realize it just brings people together and just shows you the power of music and, performance. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
Mo, the release I wanted to talk to you about was Fight Club. Alan Hines is signed for that. I dedicated some time to it on my video, but I just feel I think that was the first time, at least for me, that I started viewing the power of what great design can do on a record, which is just not sort of like it's not an aesthetic achievement. It's also an experience. Like people just have an experience with that record. Could you shed some light on sort of like how that release came about? What was the creative thinking behind it?
So Fight Club is a weird title in general to make merchandise for, and we had struggled with it a little bit on the poster side where we had the rights to make a poster for it, but like the creative directors over there were like banging their head against the wall trying to figure out like what you could do that didn't feel like it belonged in a Hot Topic, right? And that's no slight on Hot Topic, but like it is just sort of there's an aesthetic that's associated with Fight Club. If you like Google Fight Club art, right, you see and it just like looks like that, and like that's not what Mondo does. Like there's enough of a collective that like people who have like sort of envisioned what their relationship to the film is, and they put it in this place and it sort of begins to exist, and that's the imagery that exists more than the film's key art. And then that's a rare occurrence too, where you start to be like, oh well, if there's like fan art that has sort of begun to evolve past the place of what even Mondo can do, like what do you do that's even more conceptual? And then the other variable of this is that like when making artwork for records or posters, the thing that most people may not understand is that like when you get those rights, sometimes they're given to you with like a very big asterisk, which is just like, here you go, by the way, there must be no mention of Brad Pitt on this package anywhere whatsoever, right? Like, and I'm not saying that's the case here, but it is just very much just like, oh, by the way, like you can't put any talent on this unless this becomes like a very, very, very difficult thing for you to get approved, because it's one thing to get a soundtrack approved using stills and existing key art, but the second you change the package, it has to get routed to original producers and directors, and that's hard enough. But then if you want to bring in talent, then you have to bring their team into the fold, and that may take months, years, whatever. And so hence why some projects of ours take months, years, because we've committed to it when possible. But with Fight Club, we sort of just immediately decided that like this wasn't going to be a thing that we just put a picture of Brad Pitt and Edward Norton or Helena Bonham Carter on. We wanted it to sort of poke fun at the idea of having a perfect mint condition record in your collection, right? Like it was around the time that people had started accusing us, and this is something that's quite recurring with the world of vinyl in general. And maybe you've heard these stories, but like for every single year from 20 2013 to 2018, maybe even until last year when it finally changed and everyone could definitively say that vinyl was here to stay, right? But every single year there was some bullshit article that was like, don't believe the hype. Vinyl is, gonna see a dip and people aren't really buying records for the music. They're just putting them on their walls and they're just framing them. And like, why are people buying? It was like all these pundits, all this bullshit. And so like, we were sort of in like the peak of being like, eye roll, this is so stupid that people don't believe that people are buying these records for their music. And then like a light bulb went off in our heads, and it was me, it was Rob Jones, our co-founder, and Alan Hines. We were on like a phone call. I remember vividly just pacing the warehouse for like an hour and a half talking about the ideas. At one point it was going to be a regular gatefold, but like you would have to tear the like if you ever hold the gatefold record and opened up the pockets, if you tear the sleeve and you like refolded it the other way, it would be a completely different artwork. Like that was one idea. And then that evolved into what if it was a package that was sealed shut that you had to tear and get into. And then it was like, oh my God. And then like you have to put the onus on the customer. Do you want to hang this on your wall, or do you want to actually open this record and listen to it? And that became the like, oh my God, we can actually do this. And then we were like, oh shit, but now we got to pitch this to David Fincher. Like it was like, okay, well then you have the idea, then you have to like kind of, it's hard to like explain that. So you have to like kind of develop it. And then you get sort of these weird notes being like, don't make it too IKEA because IKEA could get angry. And then, so like, there was a lot of tightrope walking to make sure all parties were happy, but we landed at a place. And then after that, then we had to figure out how to fucking do it, because then it was like, oh my God, okay. But then like we have to custom design a jacket that involves a tear strip, and how do you fabricate that? Like, where do you get those made? And then custom obi strips, belly bands, and then, all these different things. It was like, everything took forever, but at the same time, no one had any expectations of us doing it, right? And so like, it was one of the rare occurrences where we could just do it in a vacuum and just workshop it until we were happy with it, as opposed to sometimes when it's like, oh, this film comes out in 6 months and we want to get this out, or this movie just came out and we want to get this out within the next couple of months to hit the home video window, or this is just like a title that's out and we are just like going to celebrate it. Fight Club is famous, but like, sadly, people don't talk about the Fight Club soundtrack nearly as much as they should, given that the Dust Brothers sort of created the template for the like early 2000s like trip hop craze and synth scores and soundtracks and stuff like that. Like the Dust Brothers never really did a soundtrack after that ever again, which is shocking to me given like how incredible that soundtrack is. So like, I wanted to celebrate it. I wanted to give it its own thing. But then beyond that, like there was no like handcuffs on us other than just getting it out whenever it made sense. And so that to me is like the ideal. I think it took us about a year to make that thing a reality. And then when it was finally done and it came out and people were even remotely interested in it, that to me is like a win.
What's a release from Mondo or Death Waltz that sort of exceeded your expectations? Like the final product is just like, I had no idea I was going to turn out that great or, perform that well. Just however you want to interpret exceeding your expectations. Spencer, I'll start with you.
This, I probably shouldn't even say this, but because people above us will be watching and I'll get my wrist slaps. But I never care about if we're going to sell records or not. I don't care if we, like Autopsy of Jane Doe cost so much money because we had to tool everything. And then we put it in a body bag that split. So we had to remake the body bag because it wasn't the right material, but no one knew that. Again, I mean, for me, it's just if the record turns out, and looks amazing, even something as simple as Tales from the Loop, which, we used key art, essentially, we used the 3 posters, Mo put the package together, and it looks absolutely beautiful. And, you could argue that that's just a regular kind of release. But, I look at that and I'm really proud. Like we both, and I know this because we talk about this all the time, because we can't fucking believe that more people didn't see that show and we're not talking about the score because it's incredible. So for me, it's just about I think it's just, you get to work with incredible people. You get to release a product that, you're really proud of, that you would buy anyway, and you can just sit there and be like, sometimes we can take a breath and go, oh, we did this. This is like really cool. And, the main thing is when people are happy, customers are happy, like fans of the labels are like, oh my God, I can't believe that these guys put this record out. I never thought I would get this. And, like Josie and the Pussycats earlier, the fans of that show have been criminally underserved because you can't buy merch for it. So when they had that record in their hands, they were overcome with emotion, which to me, that's like, if we'd have only sold one copy, then if that person's like, if that's the best thing that person has, then your job's done. You can't get anything more than that.
I do want to shout out Over the Garden Wall, which wound up being a very similar title to Josie, in which, like, even though it didn't have nearly the 2 decades of fandom to time to grow a fandom, it immediately had this very big cult following. And so when we pursued it, it was sort of like a micro version of what we were dealing with since like 2012, where we would go to record labels and be like, hey, we want to put this on a vinyl. And people would be like, are you crazy? We went to Cartoon Network and we were like, your mini series that you released in 2014, which was like a year ago, we want to put the soundtrack out on vinyl. And also we want to do a cassette tape that's like a proto, like, prop replica, but also a functional, listenable thing. And they literally just stared at it with dead eyes. And they were just like, what in the world are you talking about? No one would buy that. Also, we have no infrastructure for how to deal with this because we're an animation company, and like releasing soundtracks is something we've never done, period. And then also on top of that, like, no one's going to buy that. So we managed to just, I guess I think we just literally begged and begged and begged until they told us to shut up and let us do it, because the goal was, there's like, okay, fine, if you can get the composers to agree to it, and if you can put them together with the creator and the creator's happy, then fine, whatever you do, whatever. And so then we did that, but then in the process, we pitched, we're friendly with Elijah Wood. He lives in Austin, and he, is a big advocate of that story as well. And so when we were like, we had this idea, we want to do the cassette, and then he was like, oh my God, like, you should reach out to the blasting company, and we should. And then I was like, yeah, we should reach out to the blasting company. And then we're like, oh my God, like, you should actually record some spoken word poetry and clarinet, because in the show they joke about this cassette tape featuring something as inextricable as inexplicable as poetry and clarinet music. Like, what if you recorded some of that? And then they actually got into a studio and recorded that, and recorded this like incredible little like 12-minute skit basically. And it's so good, and it's so random. And like, I was like again, to Spencer's point, like, I don't give a shit if any single one of these things sell at all. Like, I am so happy if they do. It's almost frustrating when they sell out, because then we have to deal with people being angry at us. But like, at the end of the day, like, if somebody is like, this is so cool, as a fan, I'm so stoked, that to me is like it, right? One of the releases that I wish that we did ourselves is shortly after Cloud Atlas came out, this Wachowski's film from 2012. In the film, there's a vinyl that's being passed around throughout the film of a recording of what's called the Cloud Atlas Sextet. It's a recording of a symphony that they found in a used record store at one point. And the composer self-released it themselves in the EU. And I bought it just, like on their website right when it came out. It was like $20, whatever. It goes on Discogs now for like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But like, that's exactly what I would have done if we had the rights to do the Cloud Atlas soundtrack. I want to do the Cloud Atlas soundtrack. But like, that came out, and I see that, and I'm like, as a fan, I'm like, I am so excited that I have that. And that to me is what Over the Garden Wall was like, we did that cassette, and it was like, I can't believe this exists. Like, I can't believe we willed this thing into existence, and that people bought it and they were so excited about it and continue to be excited about it. Like, Over the Garden Wall, again, despite being 10 episodes that aired in 2014 and never to be expanded upon since then, literally continues to be one of our most requested and sought after things. And like, that to me is the true virtue of like this label, is like, we get to do that. And I got the finished record of it, and I was like super happy with it. And the fact that it continues to bring me joy and other people joy is a miracle.
I think that's my personal favorite from you guys for all the reasons you just mentioned. So I want to ask you guys are coming up on almost a decade of releasing soundtracks. That's a pretty big thing. Well, what have you guys like learned along the way? Like how, because like you guys mentioned earlier, like you were in a state where you were emailing companies and they'd be like, what, really? Which I'm pretty sure that's very different nowadays. So like, what's been that process for you guys? What have you guys learned?
I think the one thing that I've learned, especially, we try and go to LA once a year or twice a year and do a ton of meetings with everyone. And I think the big takeaway is that if you're like respectful, you're a good partner to people, you release good products, and you involve everyone, then projects will come to you. I mean, who knew that me and Mo would go to Disney 4 years ago and they would say to us, give us both your top 10 of things you'd like to put out, and we'll begin to work down that list.
Amazing.
That's incredible, for just two blokes. Like, it's pretty great. And that's, to me, that's we have such great relationships with the studios and composers and other labels. I think that's the one thing that, I wasn't a dick when I was younger, but I was pretty arrogant, man. And I definitely mellowed out, although I get really stressed out all the time. That's just me, but I've definitely mellowed out. And, for me, that collaboration is like the really amazing thing. And I've really learned to love that. And not just with studios, but with our work colleagues as well. Because, we all bounce things off each other, and work, I mean, we joke like, I'll be working at 11 p.m. at night, and then Mo gets up at like 6 a.m. We talk to each other more than we talk to, Mo talks to his wife and I talk to my partner, So, yeah, I just think those relations is the thing for me, and being respectful and a good partner.
Spencer when his label merged with ours, he had already been using his platform to release other records via his friends' labels, right? He had this, great relationship with One Way Static and Terror Vision and all these other labels, and it had never even crossed my mind that was even a reality, right? That was a version of a thing that we can do or should do, right? Like, it's very easy to be very singularly focused, very narrowly focused, and only look out for yourself. And that's just like the general, unfortunately, a very American thing to never even consider the things you can do with your platform. The most amazing thing that Spencer brought to the company is the idea of helping out other labels. And through that, we have been able to share our bandwidth and our space to help spotlight all these amazing independent labels, Enjoy the Ride, not Milan's on an indie, but like sharing our love of Milan's titles, Lakeshore's titles, Terror Vision, Ship to Shore, Tiger Lab, Data Discs, like all these different soundtrack labels that like started with similar goals and aspirations and like are doing incredible things that we can't do and aren't going to do. And over the course of 10 years, just time and time again, it's just, there's never been a downside to doing that. Like literally only the best things have ever happened because we've just been nice to people and been friendly with other labels. And it's like honestly, like the best lesson you can learn as a human, which is that like, go against the average judgment, the average like idea and sentiment of like just only look out for yourself and like look out for others and be supportive of others, and like the entire like the world is just going to be more fruitful and generous to you because of it. And so that to me is what I've learned over this last 10 years is just very silly, can boil it down to that general meme, but like be excellent to each other. That's it.
Last but not least, I just wanted to finish sort of with like a fun sort of rapid fire questions. Spencer, favorite film score?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's Suspiria.
This is lame as hell, but Back to the Future, man. Alan Silvestri's Back to the Future is the tops. Sorry, John Williams.
Favorite filmmaker?
Stanley Kubrick.
The Wachowski sisters.
your favorite Mondo and Death Waltz release.
I can't do this. There's no way.
You're gonna
There's no
pass.
way. I can't do it. Death Waltz would be Zombie Flesh Eaters first release, landmark. Mondo would be, I don't know, Who Framed Roger Rabbit or Over the Garden Wall.
My favorite Death Waltz is his reissue of They Live from last year, the Alan Hines They Live. It's one of the most inventive, brilliant pieces of packaging I've ever seen. It's far and away like out of control. That man is a genius and a wizard, and that package to me, like, I don't know why when we released it and people didn't just like lose their minds and start screaming in the streets about it, I was a little heartbroken. And then my favorite Mondo release is, no surprise, Josie and the Pussycats. I think that to me is going to be, if that had been Mondo #1, I think that would have been a more interesting statement piece than Maniac in some ways. I love that exists, and I love that people care.
Spencer, what about non-Mondo or Death Waltz release? Favorite release?
I love everything Terrorvision do, because honestly, because they just, they're taking the craziest shit that, even I'm that person sat in the chair going, really? You're going to put the brain out on vinyl? But they do it with like such, love, care, and panache. Love Ryan. So yeah.
I need to shout out Ship to Shore's City Pop reissues for saving my life this year. Honestly, last year they put out a reissue of an album called Seaside Lovers by Memories and Beach House, or Seaside Lovers album Memories and Beach House, and it's this city pop album from Japan in the 80s, and I was like, the hell is this thing? I had no idea, and it's just because I followed them, I was willing to take a chance on it. I listened to it, I went on YouTube to listen to it, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then it took me down a rabbit hole of an entire genre of music that I'd never heard of and fell in love with, and their series of reissues this past 18 months have literally been like the biggest joy to me. And I wouldn't have discovered it without them. So shout out to Ship to Shore for just like legitimately creating an entire new favorite thing of mine. And that just goes to show like why you should listen to curators and trust, like seek new things out and be trusting of other people's favorites. You never know what you might find.
Holy Grail, release or unrelease?
Holy Grail was Cannibal Holocaust. And then we got to do 2 versions of it because Mondo did a version and Death Waltz did a version. So yeah, that to me is one of the most incredible soundtracks ever recorded. I think that's a really interesting score because if that film had a traditional horror score, it would be unwatchable because it would just be too much. The score makes what's happening, makes you just get through it. So yeah, Cannibal Holocaust would be mine. There's others, but I'm not going to say because you never know who's watching.
I'll give you 2 answers. One of my holy grails that I got to do at the label was Magnolia. That was one of the first soundtrack and score albums that I was just obsessed with as a teenager. And I sought it out. I created this triple record with Amy Mann's songs and John Bryan's score, and like the fact they'd let us do it and that Paul was involved. It was just like this very magical experience that like sort of brought to an end to like this first chapter of like what we were doing. And then ever since then, everything's just been icing, that was like the thing that I never thought we'd be able to do. But as far as like future holy grails, this is something I've joked about a lot, but like the second that the Prince estate lets us start doing all of Prince's soundtrack albums, then that's when I feel like I can ascend into heaven and say hi to him and finally be worthy of his time.
All right, last 2 since it's Halloween. What is the film that scares you the most?
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
This is a weird way to answer this, but horror is a genre that I don't organically seek out, but I feel the need to because of Spencer being one of my closest confidants and friends, and also working for a company that dabbles so much in horror. But when I saw the imagery and the key art for Possessor, it was so gross to me, the image of the face, the skin coming off of the person's face. And I was like, And then everyone was like, oh, this movie's fucked up. This movie is so gross. And like immediately I was like, why do I want to watch this? It sounds like a punishment. It sounds like this is not fun for anything. And then I watched it, and that movie is absolutely incredible. And it is that single image is not nearly as horrifying in context, but that key art makes me like still makes me gross to my stomach just looking at it on its own. But in the film, it's not terrifying, even though there is so much worse imagery in that movie. So that's not really an answer to your question, but Possessor really rules, and you should see it. It's incredible.
Last one, favorite Halloween activity or tradition?
Dress in the house.
Yeah.
Maybe it will be Mondopalooza going forward.
Yeah.
Thanks a
Spence,
lot.
was that a flashlight that you just shined under your chin? Were you going to do...
you got in the Halloween spirit.
While we've been filming, because obviously I'm in the UK and we're already like, it's almost pitch black outside, and I forgot to set my lights up, so.